Hey everybody, I'm Nicole.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Sarah, and together we're the co-founders of Whale Tales, a living library of cetacean stories.
Today we are talking to two very special people about an extra special species of cetacean not yet featured on the pod.
So sit back and enjoy as we dive right in.
Doodaloo.
Hooray!
Yay!
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we have a really exciting episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. It's so fun and so nerdy. Yeah.
I don't know how much of the conversation is going to make it into the pod, but we talked for more than 2 hours.
Yep. It was long.
It was awesome.
Amazing.
So, as you'll hear, we talked to the Save the North Pacific Right Whale Foundation people, Kevin and Kate.
Kevin is the founder of this foundation, as well as Deep Green Wilderness, which is a sailing and marine science organization. And Kate is the media coordinator for Save the North Pacific Right Whale Foundation.
They are both amazing and awesome, and we think you're going to enjoy the interview as much as we did.
Today we have Kevin and Kate with us from Save the North Pacific Right Whale Foundation. So hi, Kate and Kevin, thank you so much for being here. Tell us about yourselves and what the foundation is.
Kate, maybe if you want to introduce yourself first, because then I'll spiel about Save the North Pacific Right Whale.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. My name is Kate. My pronouns are she, her, and I have been an ocean nerd for my entire life. Ironically, I didn't really study the ocean in any sort of college aspect, a little bit in undergrad, but I mostly studied land-based sciences. And then through that, have still managed to make my entire career out about the ocean. And so I have spent a long time out on the water, teaching people about marine science and focusing on things like science communication and how to tell stories about the nature around us. And that has inevitably led me into this project with Kevin, where we're working to educate folks on the rarest whale in the world.
So my name is Kevin Campion, pronouns he, him, and I am a lifelong whale nerd, very heavy whale nerd my entire life and my entire career. Kate and I know each other because my day job is running an organization called Deep Green Wilderness. And Deep Green Wilderness takes middle and high school students voyaging from a week to a month on a old, she just turned 90-year-old sailboat, mostly in the Salish Sea. And so, and teaching sailing and navigation, but very heavy focus on marine ecology, through a lens of whales and whale conservation. And Kate and I worked together for years, some of which were COVID years, which were a bonding experience outside of just being normal shipmates. And so I've had that organization going for 14 years. And Save the North Pacific Right Whale is a kind of a spin-off or a branch of what we do on board. And that, you know, our mission on the boat and kind of my life mission is to get other people excited about things that I am excited about. And one of those things is North Pacific Right Whales. And I can give you a much longer version of why that is here in a moment. And coming to you from the Oregon coast right now.
Awesome. Getting people excited about what you're excited about is kind of our mission statement. So you're in the right place.
Nice.
And although we really, really want to nerd out about North Pacific right whales, I also want to know how I can come on board the ship, because that sounds incredible.
Yeah, we just kind of wrapped up our summer about a week ago, and I bet I saw 90 humpbacks and 50 orca, lots of just really great whale experiences, and we worked pretty hard to get the kids having a good whale encounter. It's not a close one, but one that seems special to them, and then taking that and being okay, you just kind of fell in love with whales for this reason or that reason, whatever the thing is. And what are you going to do with that new passion you have? You're learning these things about them. What's next? What are you going to do? These whales, depending on what species, populations need your help, and they need, humans to act with them in a different way. And so we get them. There's a very strong like group building, community building, and then a very strong like get them to love nature and have these interactions. And so we work really hard at that, and then the rest kind of follows, and that they're easier conversations to have. So that's what we do on the boat. And if people are interested, there's on our Save the North Pacific Right Whale site, I'm sure, a link to Deep Green Wilderness. And if you know a teenager that wants to come sailing and learn about whales, send them our way.
Oh, so cool.
Oh my gosh, can we go back in time and
there's so many things I would want to do with a time machine, but like this is now really, really high up on the list.
It's really high up. Yeah.
We got to get more adult trips going, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But until you've got that set up, let's talk about the foundation.
Let's nerd out about right whales.
Okay, so Save the North Pacific Right Whale is our mouthful of a name, and we like to say our mission is in the name. We exist to save the North Pacific Right Whale. Yeah. And North Pacific right whales, for those people who don't know, are considered one of the rarest whales in the world. With a population, there's two populations, and I'll let Kate talk a bit more about some specifics of their ecology. But between the two populations, there's a very low amount of whales. And off our coast, off the west coast of North America, there's probably about 30 whales. So, and that is a genetically distinct population of whales. There's so few of them that I did not know they existed. And like I mentioned earlier, lifelong whale nerd. And in 2013, I was scrolling through the Orca Network Facebook page, as you do, to see what whales are around. And there was a little blip in there about North Pacific right whales seen off of Swiftsure Bank. And this was October in 2013. And I scrolled by it, and then I scrolled back up and was like, wait, what was right whale? North Pacific right whale? What? And so that was my introduction to the species. And me being who I am, I was like, I just got curious about it. Didn't know why I'd never heard of them. Started to ask around just the orca folks I knew and humpback researchers I knew. I was like, hey, who should I talk to about North Pacific right whales? And have to like researchers and kind of like the whale community was like, wait, North Pacific right whales? Or they'd send me to Atlantic right whale folks. And so in my learning, and there's been a deep dive into learning about these whales, which included a film that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. But in that, it became really obvious to us and like a couple other friends and Kate and myself that there was no group out there that was the voice for these guys. And not only that, they're in desperate need of some strong advocates. And so we started Save the North Pacific Right Whale just to be the voice for North Pacific right whales. And the slightly longer answer is the biggest conservation need for these whales is to people to know about them. And, I said when talking about our sailing program, one of my passions is to get people excited about things I'm excited about. It's something I'm good at. And that's the biggest need for North Pacific right whales. And so that really is what we do with Save the North Pacific right whale is things like this, presentations, talking about them. We have our film. Kate has done this amazing collection of all the sightings since Kate, 1970 or something?
Yeah, it's currently stopped at 1970. Who knows where that's going to go in the future? But there needed to be some lower limit to the sightings record.
Yeah.
But so we're the only organization dedicated to this species, and there's some other conservation groups that have worked on their issues and worked doing great work on their issues, but we're the only ones that have this as our particular, the sole focus.
Yeah. Wow. That's really amazing. I love how, especially, one of the things that we talk about a lot with our listenership is you can just have an idea, and it doesn't really matter who you are or what your education is, but you can just have something you're passionate about and something that you notice there's a gap, or there's nobody who's doing this, or it's just something you want to do. And that's the core of your story. And then look at what you've done. look at what you all are doing. It's really inspiring, and we're so excited to have you here talking about the North Pacific right whale. So what would you like to tell us about these whales that even self-proclaimed whale nerds might not know exist?
Great, I will take this one. So we have the North Pacific right whale. It is a very large whale, 50 feet long, smooth back, very dark skin, has these really fun white patches on its nose, on its rostrum, called callosities, which are actually basically just like rough patches of skin that collect whale lice, which is what makes them white. But the cool thing about those is they are an individual fingerprint to every single whale. And so folks can actually identify them through pictures based on the callosity patterns on their faces. They have a very distinctive V-shaped blow and are just large and round and hanging out. A lot of folks, when we say right whale, picture the North Atlantic right whale. North Pacific right whales look almost exactly the same. Difference is they're in the Pacific Ocean instead of the Atlantic Ocean. And we're actually, for a really long time, classified as the same species, the northern right whale. And then through genetics, folks were like, hey, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean don't really connect anymore. Obviously, as the Northwest Passage opens up, that gets a little bit more wonky. But historically, they didn't really connect since Panama closed. And so these were two distinct, separate species, and the North Pacific right whale came about in the scientific literature. Within the North Pacific right whale, we have two populations. We have the population that's over on the North American side, and we have the population that's over on the Asian side. In terms of how many there are, like Kevin said, sort of the last population estimate of the ones on the North American side was about 30 whales, and that was based on studies that were done up in the Bering Sea. This might come into play later. We have been since seeing whales that aren't necessarily in the Bering Sea. We've been seeing a lot of whales down in California, and so now there's questions coming into play of, is this all still the same population on the North American coast? Are there then subpopulations within that? Is it really still 30 whales? Can we up that number? That's kind of where the debate is currently. On the Asian side, there has not been a good, reliable population estimate over there. Hundreds is kind of what everybody says. So, with the couple hundred over there and the 30 over here, basically there's not that many left. Nope. Yeah, I can add a few other things. They eat copepods, so they're baleen whales, and so they have this really long, keratin-based structure in their mouth, and basically just shove their face through the water and catch a lot of little copepods, which are tiny little plankton, and that is what they eat. So they're kind of in the same realm of blue whales, where these largest animals on the planet eat some of the smallest creatures on the planet, which is really, really cool.
I'm realizing as you were talking that we actually haven't talked about right whales at all, really, yet on the podcast. So can you give us a little bit more behavioral stuff of do we know anything about their migration? What, obviously we know the Atlantic migration because that's the big part of their conservation issues. So, but I'm thinking about the Southerns. I've got no idea what goes on down there except that they're there. So what do we think the Pacific right whale behavior is migration-wise, pod, mating, etc., stuff like that? All this stuff. Yeah. What do we know?
Just any and all behavioral things that we know.
Yeah. And you touched on some actually very critical points in that a lot of what we assume about North Pacific right whales is based on what we know about North Atlantic right whales. Because the moral of this story, long story short, we just don't know a lot about North Pacific right whales. So one of the big unanswered questions about this whale species is still, where the heck do they go and what the heck do they do? We don't know where their breeding grounds are. We don't know if they migrate. So there's all of these whales are hanging out in the North Pacific Ocean, and at this point we still don't know what they're doing or where they're going. Basically, the little tidbits of information that we get from every sighting are like, hey, are they feeding in this area? Like, that's a behavior that we can like sometimes like glean through imagery that's collected. If like the sightings are done by scientific organizations, we can sometimes get information like a biopsy sample to be like, okay, is this a male or a female? And some things like that. The luck of the draw in the past is if like a juvenile is sighted, then we can say like, okay, cool, within the last like 10 years, somebody was breeding. But for the most part, there's just very little information that we have about these whales. And those are all still like massive, big scientific questions that are important to answer that we still don't know is like, where the heck are they having their babies? Obviously, that's like wherever they're having their babies is a very critical spot to protect for this species. And we just don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, you know, for North Atlantic right whales who are, you know, it's pretty dire straits at population level, they're, you know, a little bit like the southern resident killer whales in that we know most of the individuals, you know, and you know, they'll cite, I don't know, schooner off of Florida, and then they'll see them off of Nova Scotia 2 years later, whatever. It's not, you know, you can't track them to the same clarity you can with southern resident killer whales because you don't see them as much. But we know a lot about that population. And, you know, these whales have dozens of sightings, if not more, some of them don't get seen that often. And then when Kate talks about sightings with North Pacific right whales, it's funny to talk about it in the plural because it's like one a year, one every 2 years. We'll go a whole year where like, you know, maybe one was seen in the Western Pacific off Asia, but we don't even hear about that or find out about that one. And so our population off of North America, we can go entire years without one of them even being seen. And that, you know, and so much of, you know, there's in the last 40 years, there's been a couple of like big efforts to find them. And sometimes they've gotten lucky and found multiple over the course of a month or multiple even in a day. But the much of what we know about the distribution of North Pacific right whales is all from whaling records. And, you know, it's dated in that it's whaling records. It's not comprehensive because it was, you know, they were not doing unbiased survey efforts. They were, you know, seeking out where these whales were. And so, and then, you know, here's a population. I mean, I'm going to stop myself here because I'll get into talking about the whaling real quick. You guys haven't done a right whale show yet. So like just some general right whale stuff might be good as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'm just realizing now that we haven't, which is weird, but here we are.
We're pretty stoked that like we always have a little chip on our shoulder about how much media attention North Atlantic right whales get, deservedly so. They're like I said, you know, their population is in very rough shape. But like, you know, every now and then Seattle Times, you know, who does pretty good publishing about whale issues, they'll do a story about North Atlantic right whales and we're like, oh, just come on, give us one about North Pacific. But so just right whales in general, worldwide, there's 3 species. So we have our North Pacific right whales. There's the North Atlantic right whales, which live in the North Atlantic, mostly off the North American coast, historically off of the European and African coast as well. And then the southern right whales who live off of all the like southern land masses. So South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, South America, and then, you know, in towards the Antarctic waters in their Antarctic summer. Both the species that we know a lot about, North Atlantic and southern right whales, both have latitudinal migrations that we have been able to follow, either through re-sightings or satellite tagging. And so we presume the same for North Pacific right whales, that there's some sort of seasonal latitudinal migration. They're up towards the Arctic in the Arctic summer with all that daylight. And then as that seasons change, at least some of that population historically likely went south somewhere to have calves and breeding, on the way or in that calving ground. Their right whales are called right whales for a pretty awful reason. They were the right whales to kill. And that is because they float after you kill them. Very useful if you're dealing with an animal that can weigh up to 100 tons historically. And then, huge yields of blubber, and then very long baleen plates, which, whale oil from the blubber and baleen were the historical reasons for targeting these guys. And all those populations were absolutely hammered by commercial whaling. Basically all three species have, been whaled as long as whaling's been around. And I know a little bit about indigenous whaling on North Pacific right whales, not much about it on the other species, but it was really commercial whaling that caused the extinction of the eastern Atlantic right whales, really hammered the southern right whales, and then North Pacific right whales are the last species to be targeted, and we're talking like 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. So real picture Moby Dick sailboats leaving mostly from the east coast of North America, sailing around Cape Horn up into the Pacific, sending rowboats out to harpoon these whales. But it was such a refined industry at that point that the estimate is that between 1840 and 1850, 20 to 30,000 right whales were killed in that 10-year span, which is a mind-blowing number. That's probably what the population was at that time, but they're also reproducing in that time as well. And that's from, there's really good data from these historic whaling records. There's not great scientific data, but there's really good, we caught this many whales in this place data. And so right whales in the North Pacific right whales are in the straits they're in now with that super low population because they are still recovering from whaling that happened, 150 years ago. That's how hammered the population was at the time. And which is mind blowing to me that, for me, when I say I took this deep dive into learning about North Pacific right whales, really what I took a deep dive into, and it was dark, was a deep dive into learning about the history of whaling in the North Pacific. And I'm a sailor. I'm very interested in maritime stuff. So I enjoyed that learning, but it's really sad how the amount of whales that we pulled out of this ocean, and that we're still really dealing with the effects of that today. So that was the initial wave of whaling in the North Pacific, but then there was another wave. They were protected. All right whales were protected in 1935. They were the first whale species to be protected internationally, along with gray whales, and it was part of the early stages of the International Whaling Commission. It was a global effort to say there's not enough of these animals left. We need to do something. But that protection wasn't really enforced. In the 50s, 60s, and into the very early 70s, there was a legal Soviet whaling campaign in the North Pacific that took about 800 North Pacific right whales, which again was probably the majority of their population in that 30-year period. And so they would have started to recover from the 1800s whaling, and then again this getting drastically reduced in the middle of the last century. And what's interesting about that last one is there was researchers tracking whale sightings at that time as well in the 1900s, and you could see a growth in sightings, and then all the sightings vanished starting at the end of the 50s. So there's research that shows that population going down. The Soviets their logbooks eventually got declassified. And it was some pretty cool research from a woman named Yulia Ivashenko, who actually lives in Seattle, that she speaks Russian. She's Ukrainian, speaks Russian, and met with these old Soviet whalers who, it's a longer story. It's a very interesting story. There's a book called Red Leviathan that I highly, if anything I'm talking about is interesting to any of your listeners, it's a super cool book about Soviet whaling. But she was able to figure out that they had logbooks that showed all these whales they killed, and with some really good scientific data in it, because the Soviets had biologists on board and modern-ish science techniques for. Anyways, I'm talking. There's a lot to unpack with these whales. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to go so much deeper. I'm like struggling to figure out what to unpack first, because thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just start with a thank you.
Thank you for going on that deep dive and sharing it with us. So.
Yeah. Well, I think the next logical thing in my mind is all that stuff is it sucks. It happened. It really affected the species on a population level, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah.
But we know these whales are swimming in an ocean right now that have contemporary risks to them. There are things that we know are risk factors risk of mortality to them in their ecosystem now. And so that mostly we know, again, as proxy from North Atlantic right whales, but year to year for North Atlantic right whales, the main cause of mortality is either entanglement in fishing gear, like pot fisheries. So crab and lobster, or ship strike, like the whales just swimming at the surface. Right whales happen to spend a lot of time at the surface, and so are susceptible to getting hit by ships more so than other species of whales. And so year to year, one of those factors is the highest cause of mortality, much higher than a natural cause of mortality in the population. And so we know just from a very similar ecology that these are also more, risk factors for North Pacific right whales. And if from a management level or conservation level, there's never been any change made in the Pacific due to the fact that the rarest whale is swimming in there around these risk factors. But, North Pacific is a heavily trafficked area for shipping. The Bering Sea, where a lot of these whales spend most of their time, is a very busy place for fishing. It's very, very lucrative fishery for North America. And, it's a very productive place. There's a reason for that. And so far, there's not been any change. They have critical habitat designated in the Bering Sea and critical habitat designated off of Kodiak Island, just south of the Aleutians.
Yeah.
But there's been no meaningful rulemaking or regulations in either of those critical habitats for reduced, potential for ship strike or fishery entanglement.
Yeah, it's just a catch-22 because they can't do more stuff until we know about more of their stuff, but we can't know about their stuff because their numbers are so low. And it's just, how do we get out of this cycle?
Yeah. I think it's important to, sometimes when we talk about whaling, especially historic whaling, and the impacts that's had on various populations like the right whales, it's almost inconceivable for our modern faculties to understand how different the ocean environment must be for this species now compared to what it was in the 1800s. It does just break my brain when I really try to conceive of because obviously what any species needs to recover is a healthy environment. But if we're talking about the last time that this species had a healthy environment, and that was in the early 1800s, that it's saying it's not the same ocean anymore doesn't even begin to cover it.
Yeah, and these are long-lived species as well. Like right whales, because there's not that many of them, we don't have a direct age guesstimate for this species, but 70 years is like a reasonable estimate for this whale. And so the whales that are alive right now conceivably could have been alive when that Soviet whaling was happening. And so there's also like, you're not just talking about the ocean being a different place for the species as a whole, you're talking about the ocean being a different place for the individuals.
Yeah. Do you think there's any chance that right whales have the same, I said right whales, whoops, sorry. Do you think there's any chance that right whales have the same longevity as those crazy bowheads who, unbeknownst to all of us, turns out they're living for 100 plus years, 200 years?
Here's hoping. I mean, I think that would be fantastic for this species, right? Because it means that there's that much more time for them to breed and have babies, which is what we need. I will toss in that the one positive-ish part about all of this is that sort of when we're talking about the genetics of a species, right? Like, if you have low genetic diversity, then your chances of survival are also low. Like, basically, you want a population that is healthy and diverse. And whaling, terrible. But because the whaling happened over short time periods, kind of in both, in the 1800s and then also in the 1900s, North Pacific right whales actually still have higher genetic diversity than anybody expected. Wow. And so there's not that many individuals, but they do still have diverse genetics. They're actually more genetically diverse than North Atlantic right whales. And so part of this could be because of hey, maybe they're not having babies, and so maybe we're sampling all of the ones that were still alive in the 70s, the 60s and 70s. Especially if these are as long-lived as we think that they might be, then this remnant population could just have sort of carryover genetics from before. But because that whaling happened such a pinpoint time in the history of these whales, it has led to them still maintaining some of their genetic diversity, which is great because then that makes the recovery that much more hopeful and that much more feasible.
On the note of recovery, I think one of the things that we encounter a lot is the confusion that exists, especially for the people who are trying to learn about this, amongst various success stories of recovery for species from whaling. Specifically, we'll talk on the North Pacific coast of the humpback comeback, and the lack of, well, why can't they all do that, right? It's really, really hard to understand why, if this one species that was also severely depleted and decimated by whaling is coming back so much so that we've come up with this really great catchy rhyme for it. It's hard to understand that. Do either of you want to speak to maybe some of the differences between the species that we're seeing success in their ability to recover as a species from historic whaling, and species like the right whales who are struggling a lot more?
I'm happy to take a crack, but unless you would like, Kate.
Go for it. I just did a rant about genetic diversity, so you can take this.
And thank God for the humpback comeback, because it has been one of the most hopeful things in my life as far as caring about the environment and the health of it. It's when we take students out on our boat, we see humpback whales, and in the Salish Sea. When I was the age of those students, there were not humpback whales in the Salish Sea. Or if there was one, right? Yeah. And now I could be okay, we're going to take today and we can go find one. And it's the coolest thing. And for me, it is one of the most hopeful things to carry in me as we go into this work that is often depressing if you look straight at the facts of it.
Yeah.
The reason that one of the reasons why humpbacks have made this much better recovery, and gray whales as well, is that the calving interval. And a calving interval for right whales can be and Kate might have a correction to this number, it's 7 years on average or something like that. Yeah. And so with a humpback, I think it's maybe 2 or 3. and gray whales, I don't know what it is, but certainly it's shorter than 7. And like those numbers start to add up.
Yep.
Like with the math of it is really cool. And, you know, what's cool about all of these populations with any sort of recovery is that the limiting factor in population growth with gray whales, with humpbacks, maybe with right whales, is that we were killing them. Mm-hmm. And so if you stop killing them, the population can regrow. And we're doing other things in the ocean that are harming them and killing them right now to all these species, and it's awful. But like that one main thing, like was the thing that like we decided as a planet, we're going to stop doing this, and we stopped, and we have those whales now. And that's really cool and like a hopeful thing. But it is, I think, just that life history, that really long, and I don't know why that birth interval is so long in right whales, but it is. And it's something that the Atlantic right whales are dealing with as well. Yeah.
I know that. Weird. Maybe that speaks longer to them living longer. Like, I don't even know what bowhead's birthing interval is, but I'm sure it's quite long as well.
I'm looking it up right now because I just had that question as well.
Amazing.
Okay, so according to NOAA, have a calf every 3 to 4 years for bowheads.
Yeah.
There could be something also in the like, we know their birthing intervals based on current science and current estimate as well. And so I know with North Atlantic right whales, the issues that they're dealing with, the long-term entanglements, that is affecting calving success. And so there could be some of that as well, that like sort of the other life history things about these whales, how they eat, where they go, you know, how often they're at the surface versus at depth, things like that could then impact like how often they get entangled, and then that in turn can impact their calving rate. So overall, all of these issues are so interconnected that I feel like sometimes when we're going through the current science, it's like, oh, we have this number, and we can kind of only assume that this number is based on the last X number of years that we've been collecting this data.
So speaking of collecting data, how do we know all these things, all this small amount of things about Pacific right whales? What research is going on right now? Is, I assume, still at quite the top level of just trying to find them, basically? What's happening?
Yes, that is pretty much the biggest question with North Pacific right whales right now is, where are they? And obviously, I and pretty much every other person in the North Pacific right whale world wish that we were significantly farther along than we are. But the other cool side of that question is that question is so basic and so broad that it really opens the door for citizen science as well. And so, which, like, I mean, that's what Kevin and I are, right? And so the question of where are they is being currently asked by scientists at a federal level and an institutional level. And some of the work that's going into that, a lot is being done with acoustics. We're trying to, well, I say we, the scientists that are doing the cool things at the institutions and focusing on North Pacific right whales are doing stuff with acoustics and trying to listen in the oceans to see if we can hear them, because it's basically, if you stick a microphone in the water, you get that much more distance to be able to say, like, oh, I hear a right whale, there's a right whale in this vicinity, versus seeing one physically, you have to get eyes on the animal, so that's a lot harder. With acoustics, you can also have that sort of underwater microphone hanging out on a buoy for a longer amount of time, so then you get a year's worth of data on sounds in the ocean. Obviously, that is then another task of like going through all of that data, which is a lot of data. But acoustics is a really fun and exciting and like promising way to like, hey, if we can get more of these like hydrophone deployments throughout the ocean, then there's that much more chance that we'll be able to pick them up acoustically. And then that can give us more information about like, great, we know that a right whale was there. Diving off of that a little bit more back into sort of what right whales are, they make some pretty distinctive calls. So they make what's called a gunshot call, and it is just it sounds like something is like slapping the water, and that is one of the cool and weird sounds that they make. And so that's something that scientists can be like, okay, great, I just heard a gunshot call, there's a right whale in the area. Outside of acoustics, there's some cool stuff. So Jessica Krantz at NOAA is doing a lot of stuff with acoustics. Dana Wright is doing a lot of stuff with historical baleen. So the baleen in the right whale's mouths is made out of keratin, the same stuff as our hair and nails, and it grows pretty consistently like hair and nails do. And so because it's growing consistently, it's picking up different conditions of the water at the time that it's growing.
Oh.
And so Dana's working to see if she can kind of isolate some of those fun chemicals within the baleen to then map out where that whale was in the ocean when that baleen was growing. So stay tuned. Her work has not been published yet. Stay tuned in the future for some hopefully pretty cool stuff coming out of that. And also just this like really new and novel way to try to piece together, do right whales migrate? And where do they go?
Love that.
Outside of that, and where the citizen science comes in, sightings. Sightings is the best way at this point that we can piece together more about the natural history of this whale. And sightings can happen by the scientists who are going out and, you know, checking out locations where they often are seen or where they've been seen historically, doing marine mammal surveys, doing these sort of acoustic studies that then lend to sightings. However, sightings can also happen by us. So a bunch of the sightings, even just within the last few years, have been made by fishermen, by whale watching boats, by folks on the shore of a beach. And obviously at that point it's a lot of luck and just being in the right place at the right time when these whales happen to show up. But each of those sightings made by your average person who's just hanging out on a beautiful cliff and enjoying an ocean day, or out on a sailboat with friends, or working, fishing, those sightings are just as important as the ones that the scientists are making.
Yay! That's why we exist!
Yay! And then, so what happens when there is a sighting after you do your happy dance and then everybody rushes to get whatever kind of stuff? Obviously, you were talking about biopsies at some point, so that is somewhere being looked at.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on where the sighting is, who's sighting it, how quickly the sighting got communicated to folks. Also, like, how good the footage is. So, you know, if you're like 500 yards away from the whale, which is the legal restrictions of what you should be around right whales, and you're not going to be able to get great photos unless you have just like a crazy camera, right? So there's some element of like, hey, cool, we can confirm that this right whale is feeding. Like, I see feeding behavior, but I can't then use the images to match it up to the catalog of like what right whales have we seen before. So, or also right whales are like pretty sneaky and kind of just don't hang around where people are. And so the sighting that was like in Monterey Bay a few years back was last year, it was 2023, was done by a whale watching boat. They notified NOAA immediately. Folks were like, okay, great. Like, if you can get photos and data and like, let's try to like get more information about the whale. The whale was seen for like 10 minutes max and then disappeared. And this is in Monterey Bay, where people are out on the water all the time. And
like,
at that point,
a lot of scientists,
everybody is looking. There are whale watching boats everywhere. That whale was never seen again. So, so there's some element of like, even just being like, yo, I got a North Pacific right whale. I have a photo. It was in this location at this time. Like, that in and of itself is like worthy of a scientific paper because it adds a data point. And that's kind of one of the things that I've been working on. So, well, I guess first off, if you ever see a North Pacific right whale, you should record the time, the date, where you are. If you see it doing anything like feeding, if you can get photos from a reasonable distance, great. Or from a safe distance, great. Try to stay 500 yards away from them. And then you should email all that information to np.rw@noaa.gov. Basically, that is monitored by the folks who are working on right whales at NOAA, and then that information can go into the like larger national sightings database. On the flip side, that's where my excited dance immediately turns into me running to my computer to get as much information about the sighting as possible, usually very enthusiastically reaching out to the folks who have seen the whale. Hopefully I don't come on too strong, but I'm sure that I probably do. And getting as much information from those folks as possible. And then that goes into our own sightings record. So one of the things that Save the North Pacific Right Whale started doing really early on in the start of our organization, really back in 2020, was figuring out how can we coalesce the not a lot of information, but the like kind of disjointed information about North Pacific right whales into one easy to see, easy to use thing. Because a single sighting is worthy of a scientific paper is great, but it also means that there's a lot of scientific papers floating around there, which are not easily accessible to everyday folks. And so we started working on creating a sightings map of our own. And basically it's pretty fun. It's literally just a Google map, but you can go through, and I've entered in all of the sightings from, or most of the sightings from 1970 to now. You can go in, click, find out more information about those sightings, and then through that, it's like, great, we can also start to see patterns about, you know, if there's patterns about where these whales are. We can see if a lot of the like social media stalking that I've done about folks who have seen North Pacific right whales, you can see the like links to the social media images and stuff like that of the whales. We have a friend over in Japan, Yasutaka Amai, who is incredible about recording these sightings as well. And so we basically have teamed up with him, and he has included all of the Asian sightings and also then gone to fill out the record of sightings on our side of things as well. And has done a really good job as well of like connecting it to social media and things like that. So yeah, it's a really fun map. You can, this is another link, but it's bit.ly/NPRW map.
Sweet.
So yeah, and folks can go in and poke around. We've had like almost 9,000 views since it was created, so that's pretty fun. And basically just, I mean, I use it as a resource for myself too, when I'm like, oh yeah, what was that one? Which whale was seen in like 1996 in Hawaii and then later on in Alaska? And I'm like, oh great, Nachi. Okay, cool. And so yeah, I like to use it. And it also helps to basically to like, I love science communication, and I really love science communication in a visual fashion. And so I like it because it makes things a little bit easier to like poke around and see what this species is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that sounds a lot like what I do whenever we get a new whale, and I go look them up on Happy Whale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So when Kate talks about that map, I'd just like to point out that it's been a heroic volunteer effort on Kate's part to like compile all these sightings, the data for which was in very different places and not always verified and not always cross-referenced, and just like cleaning all that up was a really cool and time-consuming thing that Kate volunteered to do. So if you guys are cruising through that map, like think about Kate spending the time staring at the computer and reading old papers, and yeah, really cool thing.
Also, it's a work in progress. So if anybody, you know, heard their Uncle Dan talk about a right whale that they saw, like, please let us know about that. If I got any of the entries wrong, please let me know about that as well. Part of what comes with coalescing all of this data is that there is some human error behind that as well. And I realized at one point that I had like accidentally dragged a sighting from like one part of the ocean into a clear different part of the ocean. And it took me like 3 months to figure out what was going on. So yes, love it. Use it. Don't be afraid to give me feedback.
Sounds like when I used to do sightings reports for BCCSN, put the lat longs in wrong. And I was like, why is this whale in a lake? That can't be correct.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll forget like a negative in
Yeah,
the
it's just
lat
like,
log.
wait a
It's
second.
like, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to touch briefly before we move on about the film, which of course I've completely forgotten the name of. What as I bring it up? The film about right whales. That's what it's called, right? So can you tell us about it, including the name and how it came about and what's it about and all of that jazz?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the film, which is called Right Over the Edge, The Search for the
Right.
North Pacific Right Whale. Yes, Right Over the Edge.
Love it.
It took us a long time to come up with, shamefully long time to come up with the title of that film. You know, the film came out of that initial sense that not a lot of people knew about these whales, and a hunch that the more people knew about them, the better off the outcomes would be for these whales. And like with the group of friends that I made that film with, we had some success making a film about the Sailor Sea called The Unknown Sea. If anyone wants to Google that, it's online for free. But so we knew we had like this track record of being able to make films, and we knew like from our experience with the other film that it was just an awesome tool to be able to like, I can talk to this many people. I can, you know, if I do a presentation or something, I can reach that many people. But like having this film where I can just email it, I can send it around, like it can take on a life of its own and tell that story, that the story basically that we're telling now, but in a really curated, thoughtful way where like, you know, we've agonized over every statement in that film. And so that if you're living in Michigan and you go to a film festival, you hear that story in a way that it's like, hopefully really makes sense to you. And then the film is about our journey to try and find a North Pacific right whale. I would love for everyone to see the film, so I'm not going to say whether or not we found one, but it's about that, like, it's going out with a group of friends to do this really like unlikely thing that we would just, you know, we knew leaving that if we want to find one, we have to be very, very, very lucky. And the people I made the film with were all sailors. And so we did a trip around Vancouver Island, is in the film, and then a trip in the Bering Sea. And both of those were like sailing trips, and they were both awesome. And like some of my favorite days of my life were on those expeditions. And the film has been a really useful tool in telling the story of these guys. It's, you know, we talk a lot about the historic, a lot about what we've talked about so far in this podcast, the historic whaling but then there is this, we're searching for this thing that is really rare, and all the things that we go through and with it as a group, and then in ourselves in that search.
Oh,
Yeah, that's amazing. I watched the trailer. It's got some of
Yeah.
our storytellers in it.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, Rob, and Jackie is in there.
Yeah, you guys must know Jackie Hildering, right?
Yeah, we know
Yeah,
her.
yeah. I mean, Jackie is like, man, like sainthood level in I love Jackie. And it was a blog post that she wrote about a whale that was killed in 1951 out of Cole Harbor whaling station. So the north part of Vancouver Island, there was a whaling station there off and on through the 40s and 50s. And in 1951, they accidentally, as the story goes, killed a North Pacific right whale. And when one was sighted, so in 2013, two right whales were sighted in British Columbia, and it was the first whale seen since the one that was killed. First right whale seen in British Columbia. And so Jackie wrote a blog post about that, which we read just as a group, and it was really powerful. And we're like, oh man, we gotta meet this person. And so we did a little bit of like emailing, and like in our very initial like doing research for the film, we're like, okay, we're going to drive up to Cole Harbor and check out the whaling station. And then Jackie lives in that area as well. And so trying to meet Jackie, and we sat down with Jackie, and she's like very skeptical for about 5 minutes. And then I don't remember if it's her, one of us cracks a joke, and like, it was like this, man, such an instant connection. We are such kindred spirits. Like the way she moves through the world, and the way she's one of the most powerful voices for whales and whale conservation that I've ever encountered. And it's just so cool to hear her talk about these things, and to get to spend time with her in this film project is a very special thing for me.
Yeah, we actually just saw the big photo of that. We were at the Whale Interpretive Center, the big section about Cole Harbor and the whaling, and that photo was there, the right whale, and
Yeah, it's
a lot to take in.
that story, that whale that was killed in 1951, and then the re-sightings that happened in 2013, one off Haida Gwaii, and then
Mm-hmm.
which was in the spring, and then the one that Brian Gisborne found off of Swiftsure Bank, so like Burcheen, Washington, and British Columbia. That story of the whale that was killed and then those two whales being resighted was like really formative to us in that, especially in that trip we did around Vancouver Island, that was, like pulling the threads or following the threads of all the sightings and that whale that was killed. And like, there's people that live in Cole Harbor that were around then, and we
Wow.
talked to folks that remember when that whale, they were kids, but they remember that whale, and it was significant to the people at the time. It was a noteworthy thing, and not for the reasons that it's significant to us now, but it was still like a interesting thing, a cool thing for them to experience.
Before we continue with the rest of the episode, we want to take a moment to tell you about how you can support our podcast and everything we do at Whale Tales.
You can join us by becoming a patron at patreon.com/whaletales. For $1 a month, you can join at the porpoise level, for $5 a month at the dolphin level, or for $10 a month, you can join us as a whale level patron.
Each level comes with a variety of different perks, including polls, thank you postcards, access to extended interviews and extra stories our guests share with us, and you can even produce your own fun flipper fact segment of the pod. Plus, we have extra podcasts because we just can't stop nerding out about cetaceans. So dolphin and whale level patrons have access to our journal club, where we take a scientific article and talk about our thoughts on the research and the findings and discuss. And then our whale level patrons get access to our completely unhinged podcast, Whale Tales Watches, where we watch a thing, sometimes read a thing that is pseudo about marine biology, and then we pull it apart and talk about what they got right and what they got wrong, and our thoughts on the movie, TV show, or book. This month, we watched a movie based on a true story, so from an accuracy scale, it might be high up there. We watched Dolphin Tale.
We did.
So
that was the thing that we did.
Yep. It was a thing that we did. Yep. And
spoiler alert, it's not a spoiler. Nicole cried a lot because that's what I do.
Yes.
Thank you so much to all of our patrons. You are amazing. To showcase our appreciation this month, we are putting up a story today for all levels, including free patrons on our Patreon, but it's not just any story.
It's a story by us as the storytellers.
Oh my gosh, we saw whales?
Yeah, we saw whales recently. Yeah, we went on vacation and saw whales. And
it was amazing. And you can hear more about that just by checking out our Patreon or following the link in the newsletter if you are a patron.
Yes, amazing. And if you aren't able to support us financially, don't forget you can get that story for free on Patreon. But also there's lots of other things you can do to help us out. You can leave us a rating or a review on your podcast platform of choice. This will help other people find us, and you can also just tell people about all the stuff that we do at Whale Tales.
Plus, you can follow us on social media at whaletales_org and send us your feedback so we can keep making the podcast even better. Side note, you all have been absolutely knocking it out of the park with your comments and the sort of moments and elements of your life that you choose to share with us in emails and all of the other ways. The number of times over the last month that Linz, who manages all those things for us, thank you again, Linz, has sent our group chat snaps of your comments and the ways in which we are touching your lives is astronomical. I really, really can't believe it. None of us can believe it. And it's incredibly humbling. And we just thank you so, so much. You are incredible. And thank you for listening. Yeah. It really, really means the world to us. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to talk about this kind of stuff forever, but it's time for Nicole's favorite.
Yay! It's time for Fun Flipper Fact with Kate and Kevin. All right. So, Kate and Kevin, you are two different people, and so you can both have your own fun flipper fact
Ooh.
if you want.
If you want.
But
Okay.
if you have the same one, then that's okay
Yes,
too.
we warned
Okay.
Kate. This has always been everybody's most nerve-wracking segment. Every single person we talk to. So don't worry if you're like feel on the spot or concerned. We are excited about any facts that you have, right whales or not. But yeah, you're not alone if you're just all of a sudden like can't think of anything about whales at all.
We did collectively come up with one, but I can also think of another individual one, Kevin, if you want to
I actually have a different one, Kate. And then I'm going to if you want to talk about the one we discussed. And I would also, I'll probably riff off your one we discussed. So
and now I'm wondering if we have the same additional
okay.
flipper
So my fun flipper fact is about right whales in general, my first one. And the reason it pops into my mind because it's actually a fun fluke fact. And that these whales, because they feed at the surface a lot of the time, right? They call it ram. They just like skim the surface with their mouth open when the copepod levels are dense enough. It makes sense for them to do that. But right whales will hold their tail up in the air and use that sail area to sail downwind. And so maybe feeding at the surface, maybe not, but they've been observed many, many times doing this where they'll put their tail in the air and use that to sail downwind. As a sailor, I think that's really cool. And following that, when right whales and other whales may have done this, I haven't read that, but when they'd be pursued by whalers, they would swim straight upwind, which is like the hardest way to sail, right? The guys would have to row after them. So like the fact that these guys are living underwater but have a sense of that air movement, which of course they would as part of their ecosystem, but it's really just so cool to me that it like, expands the sphere of how I imagine whales are dealing with the world they live in. So that's my fun flipper fact.
Love that.
That's really cool. Sounds super fun. Just super chill.
Listening to Enya
sailing down
and
the
just
ocean.
Sailing away. Yeah.
Having a snack.
I feel like that's a good takeaway for right whales is I feel like they're just really chill whales. Like they're large, they, can move kind of slowly, yet also somehow disappear immediately. It's just mysterious. They're just mysterious, chill whales. The fun flipper fact that I will add to this is that the North Pacific right whale is currently the only species of right whale that we know of that sings. So we think of singing whales, and a lot of the time we think of humpbacks with their awesome songs that they come up with. Right whales, North Pacific right whales specifically, also sing. And so they'll use combinations of their gunshot calls to form songs. Or basically patterns of their gunshot calls that they'll repeat over and over and over again. And this was discovered by Jessica Krantz at NOAA. And part of that was because she had just been listening to hours and hours and hours of the acoustic recordings of these North Pacific right whales for years. And at some point was just like, hey, I think there's a pattern, and was able to then analyze it and determine that yes, indeed, North Pacific right whales sing.
Awesome.
Still some questions about whether it's a male-only thing, whether it's related to the, sort of breeding, mating, attracting a mate behaviors. There's a lot of those questions that still have to be asked or answered, I guess, where we are currently asking them. And part of that kind of comes from the fact that we just don't have a lot of acoustic data from whales that we have then associated as being female whales. North Pacific right whales are heavily a male-dominated population currently. The Eastern North Pacific right whales, scientists are assuming that it's about a 3-to-1 ratio, so 3 males to every 1 female. Again, lots of questions with that. We don't know if folks are just surveying in the places where the males are. We obviously don't know where the breeding grounds are, which is where the females would be. So a lot of those questions still being asked. I could then go down this tangent, but also the other fun flipper fact that I was going to throw in is that the females are larger than the males, which is a fun little just feminist thing that I like to toss in about Pacific right whales. But so part of it could be that hey, when folks were whaling this species, they were going after the larger whales, and so maybe the females were potentially hunted. All of these are questions that we don't know the answers to. However, North Pacific right whales sing,
Yay!
which is really cool.
That is super cool. It's just like every time we talk about these kind of whales that we don't know anything about, we're just like, let's get on a boat and just be on a boat until we solve all the mysteries of the sea, which would be like, I don't know, 300 years, but still, let's do it. Let's just go out there. Like, it's fine that 2 out of the 3 of us are severely seasick. It's fine.
I think that's one of the absolutely incredible things about the ocean, though, is that we don't know anything about it. And everybody can ask a question and can spend their entire lives trying to answer it. And I think that to some extent that like the mystery and the excitement and the discovery that comes from all of that is incredible. And the ocean is a really neat place. And literally every day I feel like I learn something new about the ocean, and I just become more and more of a nerd when I learn things about it.
No.
There's always something to find out, and also something to always be asking questions about, which is something that I'm also really excited about. Is I'm curious and I want to ask questions. And even if some of these things, obviously with North Pacific right whales, I hope that we solve the answer or like find the answers to a lot of these things. But with other things around the ocean, like if there's stuff that we just never find out the answer to, I think that that's equally as cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's so many things. We could talk about it forever, but like the spade-tooth whale that washed up. Like,
or
what's
like
that
the
about? And,
Gingo-tooth
now
whale.
we're just gonna like learn everything about it. Yeah, and like all the beaked whales that we don't know anything about.
I know, right?
Anyway,
we say the North Pacific right whale is the rarest whale in the world, and that is currently as we know it is true. But there's also all of these whale species that we just know nothing about as well.
It's a sad argument to get into with someone about which whale is you're a fan of is actually the rarest. It's
the rarest whale. Yeah. But after all of this, people who know the podcast might be wondering, but if you've only had a few sightings, how are you going to have a whale tale? But we actually have two sightings of North Pacific right whales to share with you, which is super exciting and makes me and my got 'em catch 'em all goal makes me really happy. So, Kate, would you like to tell us a little bit about the first one? Because it's actually a recording that you got from the sighting in 2020.
Yes. So this sighting is from Likeke Goings, who was working on a shipping ship at the time of the sighting, and was traveling northward up the coast and was along Vancouver Island at the time of the sighting. And I originally connected with Likeke because it was during kind of the early years of the organization when I was just getting started with the sightings map and was really heavily stalking people on social media to get information about sightings. And we wanted to hear from some of the folks who were, just doing their jobs or out on a boat with their friends, and wanted to collect those sightings from these folks who weren't necessarily the scientists and instead were just, everyday folks like you and me. And Likeke posted a video of the sighting on Facebook. And so it kind of traveled through the grapevines and made it into a couple different Facebook groups that are also whale nerds. So of course I'm in them. And so going through all of this basically eventually ended up in my plate. And I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out to this guy. Who knows if he's going to answer? He did, which was great. And then I was like, hey, to dive even more into the nerddom, can we talk on Zoom and can I record you? And can we just nerd out for a very long time about this sighting that you did? And so, which was really cool. And you'll hear the part of the recording of his story. But I think one of the really strong takeaways from it is that he knew that it was a North Pacific right whale because of a poster of whales that was up on the bridge of the boat. The captain that he was working with at the time had a running knowledge of whales, had spent a lot of time out on the water, and, was also enough of an ocean enthusiast to then have this poster up in the bridge. And so Likeke was able to be like, what is this weird whale? I've never seen this before, and able to compare it to the poster and be like, whoa, I think this might be a North Pacific right whale. And kind of just goes to show that literally anybody can be lucky enough to see one of these whales. And especially as we spend more time educating folks and more folks start knowing and learning and getting excited about North Pacific right whales, then maybe the more sightings will also be able to gather and collect and learn about the species.
How did you first hear about North Pacific right whales?
Well, actually, I didn't know anything about them. I was on a sailing ship that went down to Antarctica. I was off South Georgia Island, and I saw a Southern Pacific right whale. And I didn't know what I was looking at. I was told by the naturalist that's what it was. And we saw a blue whale, which was phenomenal. That was a little bit easier for me to understand what I was looking at. It was a little more distinctive for me. So, and that was 2000, around 2000. So it was 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was going north, I try to learn more about the birds when I'm out at sea while I'm on watch, and definitely more about sea life. And I was very eager to try to film a whale because my wife's never seen one in real life. So I was trying to film them, and I was catching a bunch of them, but they're way off. And typically I was trying to explain to her 95% of the time, all I see is just a cloud of smoke blowing up. It's like, oh, okay, there's one right there. And so as I tried to film this one on my last trip going north, I was fortunate enough to be sailing with one of the officers who knows a lot about the marine life. He started out as a fisherman. He came across a lot of whales in his career. And also, fortunately, on the bridge, we had a poster, which I wish more ships would have, has the posters of whales of the North Pacific. And it was awesome to have that there. And that was key for me. But anyways, what happened was around 4:00 in the afternoon, I saw a whale blowing ahead of us as we're going north to Anchorage. So I look up, I grab my phone out of my pocket. And fortunately, this ship, they were really casual about me pulling my phone out, because some of them, if they see your phone, you're probably sent home.
Yeah.
It depends on the group of people. So I went out to the bridge ring. I pulled out my phone. I started filming it. It was exciting. It was exciting for about. It's still exciting. I have to say. I still get a little like
Yeah.
But it was coming right at us. I was trying to track it, wondering if it was going underneath us or something. Then I saw it pull away, and that's when you got the good sign of the back right there.
Mm-hmm.
The front, I guess you saw the head a little bit, then you see the back going away. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And I noticed that the dorsal fin was unusual, and the mate was out standing next to me. And he's the one who said, well, I think that might be a right whale.
Yeah.
I have a picture of a chart of exactly where we saw it, because I saw it at 4:01, and the ships, they take their location at 4:01 at 4:00. And the mate actually, because I called him out to see the whale, forgot to take the location. So halfway, as soon as the whale went down the second time, he's like, oh crap, I got to go take the location. And so we know exactly where we're at. Yeah, that was a little exciting. And we looked closely at that poster on the bridge. This one was an actual full-size poster, vertically. And I think the fact that they made space for it on that ship said a lot about the people on board, the captain, specifically. Or I should say captains, because you get two captains rotating. Honestly, I didn't know until I reached out to a bunch of people.
Yeah.
I reached out to, I wrote like people in England, Canada, around NOAA, and only a couple of people reached back.
Now that you can claim to be a person who has seen a North Pacific right whale, do you think you're going to be lucky enough to get to see another one now that you're watching out for them?
Well, I have to say, I'm currently trying to get on another ship, and half the reason why I would like to is I would like to try to spot another one. So I will be looking for them. I don't think it will be as easy as that was. Most of the binoculars you get on the bridge of ships have been dropped a number of times. It's hard hard to see them.
Mhm.
And honestly, I probably wouldn't be using the binoculars anyways because I'll be trying to get my phone going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hooray!
One, I think, addition I'd like to make to that is that sighting happened in like spring 2020. And so remember back, here's your time machine to
The
like
super
what
fun
your
time.
heart felt like at that time. Like this, like one of the most excited
Yeah.
moments I remember from that is when Kate and I were working on the boat with masks on, and Kate found a pack of toilet paper we had squirreled away on the boat. So like those were the things that were making us happy, and everything else was pretty dark. And when that right whale was found, man, we both like, it was just a really cool moment that like having nothing to do with the right whales really, but man, it felt so cool to know that whale was out there at that time. It was just a special thing for Kate and I.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the second story is actually from the sighting that was in May of 2024, and this is from Jan and Kirsten, who are biologists from Access Oceans.
Hi, I'm Jan Roletto, and I'm a research coordinator at Greater Farallones and Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuaries. And I'm a federal employee, and I work for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Hi, my name's Kirsten Lindquist, and I work for the Greater Farallones Association, and I'm also a NOAA affiliate.
And together we work on a project called ACCESS. It's an acronym for Applied California Current Ecosystem Studies. This project has several partnerships, one with the Greater Farallones Association, one with the NOAA sanctuaries, as well as Point Blue Conservation Science. To learn more about ACCESS and the ACCESS project, you can visit accessoceans.org. For now, we're going to just dive into our recollection of observing the North Pacific right whale. During the ACCESS project in late May, we were on station, one of our sampling stations within Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And when we're considered on station, and if you could see my fingers, I'd be doing air quotes here. When we're on station, we are basically stationary in the water. We do, sometimes we do some net tows where the ship is moving, but at this time we were doing what's called a CTD cast. And so we were also collecting water samples at various depths. So the ship that we were on was relatively stationary. It was a very blustery day.
It was very blustery. It was rough.
It was nasty, very nasty weather, what we consider somewhere between a Beaufort 5 and 6. And so the observers up on the flying bridge, we were basically on our break. That's what happens when the CTD is in the water. So we knew that the CTD was coming back up onto the deck, and Kirsten and I, we both kind of got up from basically where we were resting, maybe having a snack, basically our coffee break. And we looked in front of the ship, and what did you see, Kirsten?
I remember walking towards the station where the front of the boat where we observed from, and a whale surfaced and blew. And I said whale, and Jan said whale at the same time. And the first thing that I noticed when I saw that whale come to the surface right in front of the boat was that it was a very kind of V or heart-shaped blow. So the whale was swimming away from us, right in front of us. And so you could see the angle that the air was coming out of the two blowholes was very, almost 90 degree at an angle to each other.
Yes, that's my recollection also. It was a very different type of blow than what we normally see. And to me, I could see the blow coming out of each nostril of the whale's blowhole. It's not just a single nostril, it's a double nostril, just like ours. And it created a beautiful V-shaped blow. And I've seen right whales in the southern hemisphere, and they have basically the same kind of blow. And it's very, very unexpected. How many right whales are in the Northeast Pacific?
I believe the estimate is 20 to 40 of this stock.
Yeah.
This eastern North Pacific stock. So Jan has seen right whales before, the southern right whale. I have not seen them, but I've been studying seabirds and whales in this area throughout the Pacific for the last 20 years. So I'd never seen one, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. And when that whale surfaced right in front of the boat, I knew Jan and I were both thinking the same thing at the same time. We went, we need pictures. We need to look at this whale more. There were different things about this whale that were keying both Jan and I in, and we've worked together long enough that we were reading each other's mind. We're looking at the color of the whale, the shape of the back, the blow shape.
I know, yeah. Like Kirsten was saying, yes, we know each other really well. We've worked together for many, many years. And both of us, we were just kind of gazing out in front of the bow of the ship. And here comes this blow and this really dark black back. And we looked at each other. We turned our head towards each other. We looked at each other and we didn't want to say it because it's such a rare sighting around here that we just couldn't believe it. And I remember us saying, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Are you thinking what I'm thinking? And we're like nodding our heads, yes. And Kirsten was getting our photographer and our other whale observer, Drew, over with her camera to start taking pictures right away.
Yeah, I remember saying, "Drew, camera over here." And she's saying, "What am I taking pictures of?" "Drew, pictures over here." Because I didn't want to say, like Jan said. We were still needed to observe it again and confirm. And so a big part of confirming the observations is noting in the computer exactly what time and the location, the GPS coordinates, getting the pictures, these kind of things.
Yes. And then when between the three of us, and we're all very experienced marine mammal and seabird observers, between the three of us, I then called down because I could tell, even though the ship is over 200 feet long, and the ship was being blown towards the whale. We weren't actively motoring or moving, but we were drifting towards the whale. And the whale really wasn't going anywhere. It was very stationary. It wasn't skimming the water. It wasn't feeding. It just was basically it wasn't logging at the surface, but it was just kind of meandering and what we call milling. And
so it was coming to the surface, taking a breath, slowly going down, but not diving very deeply, and then surfacing again and blowing. And so we watched that for about 20-25 minutes.
Yes, I think it was about 20-25 minutes because I remember recording that in our data logging computer. And I remember speaking to the bridge and asked them to veer away from the course that we were at, mainly because I did not want to hit this very, very rare and unique whale in our area. So we turned course, and so instead of the whale being right in front of us, the whale ended up off of our stern, and that's when we got some video. But yeah, unfortunately, the photos and the videos, because it was such a blustery day, that all we could see is this really black back and a few blows and spouts here and there. But that was about it. I did get, when it was in front of us, I did get the opportunity of seeing just a little bit of the white callosities on the top of the head. And
I remember seeing that too.
Yeah.
Just maybe the second time it surfaced in
right.
front of us.
Yeah, right at the very beginning when we first started that observations. But we were like pinching ourselves. We were so excited seeing it.
I was in awe. And what was really cool when Jan called the flying bridge and let the commanding officer and the crew there know, basically the whole ship was able to hear over the radio that there was something really unusual to be seen. And I know the cook from the galley came out to see it. Mm-hmm. Most of the people on the boat,
a couple of the engineers that were off duty at the time,
got to see this incredibly rare thing, which is so cool for this ship, which is a research platform. And they're out there making science happen by making the engines go and cooking the food and doing all these things to get to see what an important service they provide to science.
Right.
Super cool.
So I think maybe they might want to hear a little bit about how we verified, because they're so rare. I mean, since then we've heard reports of right whale sightings within several tens of miles of where this sighting was, in the Half Moon Bay area, in the Monterey Bay area, and there might be one sighting every few years off of the coast of California. So,
but they're not usually verified.
Sometimes they're relied upon very good observers and reliable observers, and sometimes they're seen from overhead, like in a helicopter. I remember our regional director at the time, Bill Duros, he saw one from a helicopter one time. And unfortunately, he didn't have a photo, but they're pretty distinctive. They're very broad-backed, no dorsal fin. He could see the white callosities, and that was off of Monterey. In order to verify for identification purposes, because it is such an important sighting, we did go through the process of sending photos and video to the right whale experts within National Marine Fisheries Service and the Seattle lab. And they were very quickly able to get back to us within less than 24 hours and verify that yes. And this was all over the 3-day holiday. So people were on their holidays, they were on their vacations, they weren't in the office, and all of the right whale biologists, they were very excited to hear about this observation. And they were able to confirm very quickly that yes, this was a Northeast Pacific right whale. So Access, the Applied California Current Ecosystem Studies, has been a collaboration and a partnership since about 2004. And we work with other seabird and marine mammal research organizations and federal and state agencies, and provide information about abundance and distribution of whales as well as seabirds within the Northern California region. So we look at birds, mammals, but we also, so what's unique about the Access project is that we not just look at abundance and distribution of seabirds and marine mammals, but we also look in conjunction with those observations, their associated prey species. So we do net tows, and we do acoustic sampling, basically sampling the biomass that's in the water. So it's basically a glorified fish finder or krill finder is what we look at as far as forage species. So we're looking not just abundance and distribution, but we're also looking at behaviors, and we're identifying really kind of the hot spots of foraging areas for the birds and mammals that are in our area.
Yeah, Access is looking at the conditions of the waters in this area, from the prey species all the way up to the large vertebrates, the seabirds and the whales. So yeah. We've been doing these cruises for a long time.
The Access Project has been in existence since 2004, and our May 2024 cruise was our 70th cruise.
So we have been looking for whales all of these different cruises and never seen a North Pacific right whale. When I think of seeing something rare, I would never even consider saying I want to see a North Pacific right whale on an Access cruise. They are just that extremely rare. When I saw it, I thought, that's the whale of a lifetime. I will never see one again. I've no doubt.
Yeah. The uniqueness of seeing a right whale in the North Pacific it's just really rare.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is extraordinary.
Oh, so great. I'm so excited that we got 2 stories about Pacific right whales that we get to add to the library. And thank you to everyone and for sending them in. Thank you to Kate for getting that first one for us. And it's amazing.
So
Yay!
exciting.
Nick, you want to finish us off?
I will, absolutely. Obviously, we have dove very deep into the North Pacific right whales. Thank you both so much for everything that you've shared with us and with our listeners. And we always like to end our episodes with a call to action. I think this is especially prevalent when it comes to an animal as endangered as the right whales that we're talking about. And we have listeners. It's really, I'm going to gush about our listeners for just a second. It is overwhelming every time that I think about how many of you are listening to this podcast that we hold so near and dear to our heart, but still sometimes feels like just this little thing that we do. And truthfully, you are joining us with your ears from all over the world and from every continent. Actually, we have had people listen to us in Antarctica. So yes, from like actually every continent. We did. From more countries than I can count. And one of the things that I always think is so incredible about this platform that we've created is the ability of all of these people who care about the ocean to come together and make a positive change, even if it seems like, you know, a really, really small action. We have people listening to our podcast from all over the world, and that makes a really big difference. So Kate and Kevin, what would you tell our listeners is something they can do no matter where they are listening from that can help the North Pacific right whale?
Can we have a couple?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That was a really big lead up, that pressure that she just put on you.
The easiest and simplest one to start off with is just turn to the person next to you if they are not also listening to this podcast and tell them about North Pacific right whales. So much of conservation is education and getting the word out. And like we've kind of talked about throughout this episode is like, there are folks who work in whales who don't know anything about North Pacific right whales. And the more people know about them and even know maybe like a vague idea of what they look like or anything like that, the more sightings and the more information and also the more enthusiasm and conservation we'll get for this species. So yeah, tell a friend about North Pacific right whales.
Yay. Pause here. Okay, now you've told someone. You've gotten them to listen to this whole episode because where better to learn about the species that you didn't know existed until a minute ago. What else can we do?
Okay, I will go next. And so we partnered, that we being Save the North Pacific Right Whale, partnered with the Center for Biological Diversity a couple years ago now and petitioned the federal government to expand the critical habitat that the North Pacific right whales have. I'm going to go a little bit long backstory and then I'll bullet point the takeaway. So North Pacific right whales currently have in the Eastern Bering Sea critical habitat that's designated that's about the size of the Salish Sea, just, you know, which is Puget Sound, Straits of Georgia, the inland waters of Washington, British Columbia, so people can picture it. And then there's another little section that's just south of Kodiak Island that's about the size of Puget Sound. And those two critical habitats, which in the future we hope will provide better protection for North Pacific right whales that are in them, we feel they're not large enough. And the reason we feel they're not large enough is because there's lots of sightings and acoustic data that show that the whales are using habitat outside of those areas. And we feel that there's enough sightings and enough data to show that greater areas should be protected in the Bering Sea and in the Gulf of Alaska and we think those two critical habitats, should be connected through a place called the Unimak Pass, which is any right whales going from the Bering Sea to the Gulf of Alaska and the rest of the North Pacific are likely using this pass. And in fact, there's acoustic data showing that right whales are using that pass most months of the year in all 4 seasons. And so we, along with Center for Biological Diversity, asked NOAA to expand it. NOAA, the timeline that they then have to follow is they had about a month to say if that was a good or a bad idea, which is like their initial finding. They said, hey, that's not a bad idea. They didn't say it's like a great idea, but they said it's not a bad one. And then they have a year after that to say what they're actually going to do. We're sitting on year 2 of this, of waiting to hear back from them, which, you know, these whales are long lived and they've been in this plight for a long time. And our friends at NOAA are desperately understaffed for the workload that they have working around these whales. There's just a couple of people at NOAA that are doing work on these whales. So we haven't been bugging them too much. But as soon as they tell us, yes, we're going to expand the critical habitat, or no, we're not going to expand the critical habitat, it opens up a comment period, which is then when we want to engage your listeners, and we're going to be engaging all our friends to write a postcard to NOAA or send an email through something we'll have on our website that will say, we think that your decision to expand the critical habitat is the best idea we've ever heard. Please do that. You're a devoted right whale fan, or whatever it is. Or you can say, no, that's a bad idea. I want to drive my boat at 30 knots through that area. I think it's a bad idea. We hope that your listeners will feel that it's a good idea. But we'll have lots of language on our website when that comment period opens. If you would like to know when that happens and when you can comment, you can sign up on our mailing list. We're at nprightwhale.org, and there's somewhere on that site is a place to get on our mailing list.
northpacificrightwhale.org/contact.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah. You know, that ability to comment on these things is like something we're really lucky to have in the United States, where because of the Endangered Species Act, we as citizens, our voices get to be heard about the outcomes of these populations of animals. And that's a really special thing to get to do. You could be at home on your computer and let people know what you think about that whale. And the people that read that comment have to take that into consideration. So that commenting on the expansion of the critical habitat is something we would ask people to do. And then I have one more if we have the time for it. Yeah.
Yep, go for it.
And this one is a significant data point in answering the mystery of, do these whales migrate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next ask, and this is like a pet project too, a little bit. It's just like, it was 1993, correct? Is that date correct?
1994.
In 1994, there was a sighting off of the Oregon coast at a place called Three Arches Rock that's actually just south of me where I'm at right now. And there is the information documented that sighting is really sparse. And I've actually had an email exchange with the woman responsible for the sighting, but that sighting was in 1994. And so she doesn't recall it that well. But in her recollection, she says she thinks she remembers there was 2 adult whales and a calf. Okay. If there was a calf, it would be one of the only records of a calf off the West Coast ever. And so if any of your listeners came through is it Oregon University? Who has the lab in Newport?
It's Oregon State University.
Okay, thank you. So if any of your listeners came through OSU in that marine mammal lab there in the 90s and worked with Bruce Mate at the time in charge of all that, and knows where the binder is that has this sighting recorded in it, we'll send you a t-shirt and some stickers. We're just really desperate to find this information about that one particular sighting. One, because it's near a place where I live, which is really cool. But 2, because of the potential that there's a calf in that. And that calf would no longer be a calf, of course, but we don't know where these whales have calves. If we found a calf off the West Coast, the lower 48, that means that calf was probably born somewhere off the West Coast, which is, significant, because what if these whales, are calving in Southern California or Central California, where we see sightings every couple of years in the spring, right whales get sighted there, like the one in Monterey, like there's a lot of industry, there's a lot of fishing pressure, there's a lot of things that could be causes of mortality or injury for these whales. And man, any calf that's born to this population is a very precious thing. So, and any information we can get about those calves is precious as well. So if anyone knows it, email us, man. You got two new best friends if you get in touch with that info.
This is also the only organ sighting that we have a sort of record for.
Oh.
So that's part of it as well, is we've got California sightings and we've got Washington and North sightings. And the only information about an organ sighting that we have is this mention in a WDFW, a Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife report that cites it as a personal communication with the folks that Kevin's contacted. And it is literally the only organ sighting. So if anybody has information or knowledge about the sighting, you're checking off a lot of boxes by knowing about it, that will make you one of the coolest people on this planet.
I seriously think this might be my favorite call to action we've ever heard. It's so specific and also random. And if our listeners can solve this mystery, I mean, I already bow down to all of you listening, but
It's
just amazing work, team.
I know. I'm like, if anybody knows about information about this sighting, it's going to be folks that listen to this podcast.
Yeah, we're going to get the feelers out. I did just want to add one more call to action, because when this comes out, it will be about 2-3 weeks before our provincial election. And of course, as you guys in the States know, there's some stuff happening in November. So just a reminder to vote. Make sure you're registered to vote wherever you live, if you are lucky enough to be able to vote. So look into that. BC, the States, anywhere else, do that. It's the best way that you can help marine life and the environment.
Can I second that? Because I was just sitting here thinking if I should say that or not. Like, it really has significance for all these whales that we care about, and also for North Pacific right whales. If those folks at NOAA feel like their bosses are going to support them in designating larger critical habitat, in looking at other regulations that might help this population, they're going to push for those things. If they feel that they're going to lose their jobs and pushing for those things, they're not going to push for those things, because they're more effective at the work if they still have their job. Yeah, it's very real for people in the federal government. And like the federal government in the U.S. anyways is how we have the biggest influence on these populations of animals. If you care about those, it's really important. If you have listeners in any of these swing states, then it's really important. So thank you.
Yeah, we may not have as much power as Taylor Swift, which was last night from when we were recording this, but hopefully we can get a few people out there to the polls October and November.
If somebody can give us information about that organ sighting, you have more power than Taylor Swift to me, and that is saying something because I am a Swiftie.
Kate does love Taylor Swift. Now, and if someone could get Taylor Swift to endorse North Pacific right whales, then we're really talking. Yeah.
Oh, it all comes together. Can you imagine? Wow. This is true. It always comes back to whales or Taylor Swift. Whatever, depends on what you start with. Should probably wrap this one up, but it might end up being part one, especially if you guys get new sightings and new information. I know you've worked on or are associated with a couple of papers, and we do journal clubs sometimes, so we'd love to see if we could talk to you about those or anything. Also, once we get this magical organ sighting out there, we can hop back on and talk about that. So thank you so much for coming on here and just completely nerding out with us, and also teaching us. I didn't know most of that stuff, so it was absolutely amazing to have you guys here.
Well, Lindsay and Nicole, thank you both. And like, man, getting able to have fun while we do this work that we care about is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to both of you, and also thank you to your listeners and just the community of folks that surrounds whales and loves whales. And I feel very lucky to get to be a part of it.
Yeah, me do too. It's pretty darn great.
Yeah.
We would love to hear your thoughts on this or any episode. We really, really can't stress enough how much we love hearing from you. So please visit our website, whale-tales.org, where you can find links to all of the ways that you can talk to us, including the ones I don't understand. But it's okay, 'cause it's not my job to understand. It's my job to be super excited when Lindsay shares your comments with us.
You can also find the Save the North Pacific Right Whale folks at northpacificrightwhale.org, or you can find them on social media at NP Right Whale on Instagram, which is the best place for DMing them if you want to get in touch, but they're also at the same handle on Facebook, Threads, TikTok, X, and LinkedIn. You can also find Deep Green Wilderness, which is the sailing and film company that's kind of the other side of Save the NPRW, at deepgreenwilderness.com or on Instagram at deepgreenwilderness.
You can also head to our site to subscribe to our podcast, learn about supporting us and becoming a patron, and check out over 1,400 whale, dolphin, and porpoise stories, including the 2 new ones. New species alert. Bow, bow, bow. I didn't want to make that noise with our guests, but I still wanted to make it, so here we go.
And remember, that's whale-tales.org. Tales like the stories, not tales like the animal.
And if you've seen a cetacean, we would love to add your story to our library. You can click the share link on our website, or you can contact us on social media at whaletales_org, or you can email us a voice memo and tell us all about your incredible cetacean encounter.
Finally, we want to acknowledge that we recorded today's episode on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples and the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, as well as the homeland of the Tsawwassen First Nation. And Kate joined us from the Duwamish peoples' lands.
Thank you, everybody, so much. We hope you have a whaley great day.
Yay!
Bye.